Hi, folks. Welcome to the Goldcast. Today I'm joined by Mr. David Morgan. David is a precious metals analyst. He is an author of 3 books, including the Silver Manifesto, and he is also the publisher of the Morgan Report. So, David, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah. So, I guess to get started, what advice would you give to just new people who maybe they've seen all the news going on lately and they decided they want to start investing in gold and silver right now? Obviously right now the prices have increased a lot, but what advice would you give for somebody who's looking to build a portfolio over time in precious metals?
That's a great question. I think the best answer anyone could give to that question is education. You really want to know the why behind precious metals. And that's something that's kind of suppressed, repressed. I mean, it is basically out in the public, but it's not ever brought to the fore in a public school system. And really, in even college level, even Ivy League schools, they just diss the topic entirely. It'd be only in very rare schools where you have classic educations like the Mises Institute in Georgia. Then there's some other schools that friends of mine have attended, or their children, I should say, have attended. But the root fundamental problem is all fiat fails. You've heard me say it 1,000 times because it's 1,000 times 1,000 true. And shameless plug here, I'll get it in before I forget. One of the best dissertations, and I'm biased because I wrote the book with Chris Marchese, is the Silver Manifesto, and I just got 1,000 copies republished. So if you look up the Silver Manifesto on Amazon, you're going to pay $175, $200. The URL is active again, thesilvermanifesto.com. Again, it's all one word, thesilvermanifesto.com. You can buy it direct, and my secretary will mail them out to you. And there's that. So that's one place of several to get an education. Certainly, you don't have to buy the book, although it's well worth the money in my view. Plus, if you're interested in the mining sector, there's a whole chapter on how we select a mining company. So you don't want to divert too far. I mean, it's on topic. Be educated. Know why you're investing. Know why it's important. Know why at the final stages of a great inflationary experiment, number 258, you're going to end up with paper, and you may be carrying around one of those signs that was so popular in Zimbabwe about a decade ago, starving billionaire. There was a guy with a cardboard sign holding it up with all the $1 trillion notes he had. Starving billionaire, because people think and have been taught to believe that the more zeros they have on their bank account, the richer they are, not knowing monetary history.
So yeah, that's a great, I guess, outline. Obviously, people need to do a lot of research. Do you have any specific advice that would be let's say I was an individual investor and I was just, maybe I lost a lot of money in the stock market last year. And I'm seeing silver and gold are doing very well, but I don't want to get in right, at the peak of the prices per se. Do you think it's still a good time to get in? Do you think they should just buy slowly over time? Should they wait for prices to go down? What's your perspective on that?
Well, again, this is in the public domain. I wrote this years ago, but it's called The 10 Rules of Silver Investing. So if you Google David Morgan, 10 Rules of Silver Investing, you'll get a ton of ads at the top. But if you scroll down, you will find it. And it gives you an outline. And the answer is yes. I mean, basically, most people that finally figure out what's going on, and it's, again, a repeat of history, except this time it's a worldwide crisis, not just the Roman Empire, which was huge, and not just a nation state like Zimbabwe. It's going to be global, which means I think the price paradigm in the precious metals is going to go to levels that few of us can imagine, because there's so much phony fiat funny money out there being printed daily that amounts to no more than nothing at the end of the day, which we're not there yet. Yeah. So that's it. I would say in the 10 rules of silver investing, the best thing is get a position no matter what, and 2, build it up over time. Don't rush in. You're gonna, buy it and it's gonna go down. You're gonna be upset with yourself or upset with me or whatever. But accumulate. I'd say right here, right now, I'd say the way I feel about it, which could change, 6 months, year at the most. I think after the election, depending on how that goes one way or the other, it's not going to change the fundamental economic situation. I don't care who's in there. But what could change is the attitude about it, which could dramatically change the amount of money running into the metals. So regardless, you need to establish a position, and there's no time like the present, but start, don't load up. Too many people catch on to the story and they say, oh my goodness, that's just unbelievable. I never knew this. This is fantastic information. I've got to take action. I'm so glad I learned this. And they jump in with both feet in the deep end. And then they find out that the metals can do like any market, go up and down. And all of a sudden they've jumped in too deep, too far, too fast. And now they don't want to get out. And, their metals investments off 20% and it stays there for 6 months or longer. I mean, I'm somewhat famous for coining the expression that silver market especially will scare you out or wear you out. And it can scare you out with these big moves up and down. And it can also wear you out because it just grinds and grinds and grinds. And most of the people that have been worn out are gone. Now we have new buyers. It's a fresher market. I mean, there's bulls that will never give up, but there are a lot of people that are quasi bulls, or they've done what I've taught, which is, I would love to think, and this is not true at all, but I'd love to think that people actually took the conditional response I give and put 10% in the metals and forget about it. Just have a position fully paid for that you can touch and forget about it. Now, if most people did that, and I'm sure there's plenty that did do that, they're probably fine. They probably stayed in the stock market or whatever. So don't want to blow the point up too far, but there's a tendency, from my experience, which is several years, that people get the story, they understand the story, and then they overdo it instead of doing the appropriate amount for them. Is 10% the right amount for everybody? No, it's not. Some are better with 20%, some are better with 25%, some are better with more than that. But on a portfolio analysis, objectively, the correct amount is actually 25%, which is pretty high. But those are the times we're in.
Yeah, and obviously, probably most investors have much less than that as well. So one of the things you said, there's a lot of points in there. We're really headed towards a global, shaking up of the system in terms of finances. And I think that the public awareness of that right now is very high. I think people are very open to hearing that, especially given the recent history and everything like that. So do you think that there could actually be, I guess, a large interest from the public going into precious metals in the next couple of years that we haven't seen the likes of in a long time?
I do. First of all, if you go back, no one knows the numbers. They're just educated guesses. But if you go back into the first bull market, which I lived through, and went from basically the early 70s to January 21st, 1980, what you saw was a huge run to gold, especially in the last year. Same thing with silver. And they got these astronomically large moves, parabolic moves, actually, at the last few months of the bull market. And I think that's a precursor to what will happen this time. I think you're going to see the biggest run to gold ever. Going back to the idea that maybe at that time, maybe 4 or 5% of the financial assets were devoted to the gold market. Right now, we know what we can measure that about less than 1% is devoted to the gold market. So all you would need is a doubling, 2 or 3%. Let's say we get back to 5%. That would be, or let's say we get to 10%. I mean, make up your own number, make up your own mind, but think it through. In a panic buying mode where you think that there's going to be a currency collapse, you would do anything to protect your purchasing power, which means you rather buy a jar of peanut butter than hold a piece of paper. And when that consciousness hits, it spreads rapidly. It's a psychological event. And at that time, once that moment in time takes place, the velocity of money accelerates dramatically, which means instead of having that 100,000 in the bank or 10,000 in the bank or $100 in the bank or $10 in the bank, almost everyone that catches on will take that money out of the bank and buy something with it. Well, people that have a fairly significant amount of savings and people that even have modest savings will move it into silver, those with modest means, and others will run to gold like they've never run anything in their life. They'll be running for their financial life, literally for their financial life. So you will see a move. And again, it doesn't have to be 90% of the population, it doesn't have to be 10%. It could be just a few percent more than we have now, could take these markets astronomically high. And I'm pretty certain that's what is going to take place because there's really no place to run, no place to hide. Now, in the interim, you have the Anglo-American axis through the London, New York banking system, and of course, the privately held European-owned, primarily European-owned Federal Reserve System that's going to do as much as they can to control the whole paradigm. So if you look at what Mark Carney has said, not only at the United Nations, not only at Davos, and not only at Jackson, Wyoming, all three places where the elite of the elite meet and greet, he has said the same thing. And that is, I reported this in the Morgan Report, and I'm happy to do it for the public now, that they want a digital-only currency, no cash. They want it backed by absolutely nothing. And as far as what are the limits on this currency, they're going to go MMT, modern money theory, where the amount that they digitize doesn't matter whatsoever. They'll just print, as a metaphor, it's obviously is computer-generated digital currency that you're basically forced to use. So they're pretty clear about exactly what they want to implement. And of course, the pushback will be the run to gold, the people that use silver. Some of the cryptos, I favor those that are backed by precious metals, but I'm old school. And I also believe that crypto should have some merit as far as what are they used for. And I'm fine with, cryptos that are backed by, cotton, coal, grapeseed juice. I don't care as long as they're tied to something of value. But that's me. But to have something that's just a digital replacement. In other words, if it's a digital replacement, that's what the Bank of England's basically saying they want. And they've got the power, unfortunately, which means possibly, I'm not saying it's probable, I'm saying it's possible that they could say, look, you can have your XYZ crypto and you can use it peer-to-peer, but if you want to buy anything in our domain, a house, pay rent, buy food, get a car, do transportation, or have your cell phone, anything that you absolutely must have, you got to do it in our digital currency. And I think that's the way they'll go. I don't think it'll outlaw any particular currency. They'll just make it so non-useful that unless you're buying, trading cards or whatever, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but you get the idea. They want control. They want control to the absolute nth degree. They don't only want control of everything you think, do, and say. They want every transaction whatsoever, maybe even at a garage sale, to be digitized so they know about it. That's the goal.
Yeah. So, and that would be basically like a global one world currency, digital currency. Yes. I mean, while you were saying that, I was immediately thinking, obviously, in terms of like the, historical gold and silver confiscation or whatever happened in the 1930s in terms of making it illegal to privately own gold and silver. But you don't think they would do that with gold, silver, and crypto? You think they would just basically make it very inconvenient to use, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I can't rule it out. If I say I'm open-minded, I should remain so. And is it confiscation possible? Sure. Is it likely? Very unlikely. And what happens, just because Carney wants what I outlined doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. I mean, they might get to a situation where the banking elite determine they really need to get the public on board, and therefore they're going to back it with gold. But their backing would be something that I wouldn't trust. I'll just speak for myself. It's 40% backed by gold. Well, how do we know? Yeah. But it may be sort of the ace in the hole that they'll need in order to, gain that, confidence in the system. Once you've lost confidence, it's very difficult to get it back. And no, if the run to gold starts before they've got plan A, B, and C, then they're in trouble. But I think they've got plan A, B, C, D, and E already in the works. So they'll have their circuit breakers, bank closures, stock market stops. Oh, by the way, we're having an emergency meeting, which they've already scripted out. And then we're going to do this and for the public good and your own safety, and to make sure the financial systems stay together and are for your benefit. This is what we're going to do. So be prepared, folks. The only thing outside the system really are the precious metals. I think the cryptos are more easily traced and tracked than most people think. I mean, when you go to Coinbase or one of those type of facilitators, I mean, it's a KYC, know your customer, and they know just about everything. And even if you use a VPN, they'll figure out your URL if they really want to. So again, I'm not against cryptos. In fact, I'm pretty favorable, as I've said, to some of them. But the idea being that the most anonymous way to transact in a real asset base is actually with a silver coin or gold coin.
Yeah. And I think that would work basically because, if there was, given the economic situation right now, if they said basically like we need to combine the euro and the dollar into one currency or something in order to save the economy or something like that, like I could, and a lot of people have a lot of skin in the game. They don't want to lose their money, so they're going to go along with it because they're like, otherwise there's going to be another crash and whatever. So it's definitely a possibility. So
I'm not trying to bring you down. I could look. I've been at this a long time, and people have asked, how do you stay, positive and optimistic? And I'm not always, obviously, but I'm just being a realist. And people have gone through great hardships throughout all of recorded history, and we just are at a point in history where we're going to as well. And it doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. It's a big change. It's really more than an ideology change into another well-known political ideology. It's really a new one. It's technocracy. It's really an AI-based, algorithm-driven system based upon big data. That's what it really is. China's the perfect living example. It's the case study. China's the case study for facial recognition, no cash, use your phone or your face as the identifier, and it just automatically debits out of your digital account. That's what happens. I think it's 400 million that have that system in place right now in China. And the population of the United States, I think, is somewhere around 350 million. So basically, the amount of Chinese that are on this cashless, digitized, facial recognition, debit system is greater than the population of the United States right now.
Yeah. Well, I guess given everything we were talking about, how does that play into people who are looking into getting into precious metals in terms of, obviously there's always been some kind of, manipulation and suppression of prices, in particular with futures markets and such. If that kind of plan comes to fruition towards, one world digital currency system, how would that, what would they try to do in terms of, like you were saying, trying to create legitimacy for that?
Yeah, well, it's a really tough question because anyone that says they know the answer really doesn't. So I'll, state that as an editorial comment before I speak. But you got to look at what they do, not what they say. So half of the world's gold is held by the central banks. And the amount of gold that the central banks had was actually being sold off until the first financial crisis of 2008. From 2008 to present day, central banks have been net buyers of gold year over year over year, and it's accelerated. So they are, watch what they do, they're buying gold. They're buying gold for a reason. And the reason that everyone knows has studied monetary history for more than a half an hour is that gold is the last man standing. It's money. It's been money for 5,500 years, and it will remain so. So whether they plan to use it in the system or not remains to be determined. And I just quoted what Mark Carney said. That's what they want. But as I also said earlier, they've got gold as a backup. And there could be a bifurcation. I mean, the BRICS countries, you know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa could say, no lo contendo. We're not playing your game. We're going with gold. So, you know, I'm not saying this will happen, but I have to think outside the box. I pretty much always have. So they may say, we're not going for the, you know, the Globo. We're going with gold-based digitized currency as an example. So we don't know. So gold, I think, plays an important role. Silver, on the other hand, is the key to the kingdom. I mean, there's nothing more important than silver for a technological world. It's just that I can't get enough people to understand that, because if they really understood it, you would realize that silver is absolutely essential. It's a must-have. It's an impossibility to function today without it. And if people realize the true value is well beyond the monetary aspect, it's technological and monetary, they would run to silver. And once that took place, the banks would be in a world of hurt because they don't own any silver. So if the people grabbed a hold of the physical, so what would happen with the suppression, the manipulation, the futures markets, derivatives that have maintained the price for so long, they'd blow up. Because if enough people came in and actually took, you know, 2 coins, if everyone in America bought 2 silver coins for the next 2 years, it'd wipe out the silver supply in total. And that's not that much silver, you know, 350 million people buying 2 coins, 700 million coins for the next 2 years, 1.4 billion ounces of silver. That's nothing in the financial world. I mean, it's pathetically small. Think about it. Today's price, I'll round it up to 20. So 2 coins is $40, 4 coins is $80. I mean, most people on welfare could afford $80 over a 2-year time frame. So the power is actually with the people. They just don't understand what the money power is, how it's manipulated, how it's controlled, and actually how easy it would be to basically turn over the wheelbarrow, because they are addicted to their real estate investments, their stock investments, the derivatives markets, the ETFs, and everything that they've been programmed to believe, which simply isn't true in many instances.
Yeah. What are some of those industrial uses? Obviously, there's many thousands of them that I think would be very important towards the future economy. Do you think?
Well, anything electrical or electronic has to have silver. So, you know, the big one now would be solar, you know, photovoltaics. Photography's gone, and it was a zero-sum game anyway. But it's primarily the electronics industry. The thing that's the well-known secret amongst a few that study it is the battery market. A silver zinc battery is far superior to almost any battery out there, especially lithium. But no one wants to come to the fore and talk about it because it's only used primarily in military applications. But if you have a hearing aid battery, what do you have? You have a zinc silver battery. Why? Because it's about that big. It's in your earpiece and it lasts for 2 years before you have to replace it. How would you like to have a cell phone that goes for 2 years before you have to charge your phone? I'm not saying that's the case, but you get the general idea of the superiority of silver over other metals as far as a storage vehicle for batteries.
What are some
That's one. I mean, there's others. I mean, I could go on. I mean, there's been one, for example, there was a way to preserve wood using silver ions, and it would basically wipe out the silver supply. So you know that's not going to happen. So they use copper carbonate instead, and it works okay. I mean, you could substitute copper for silver in some applications, but you're going to get a much inferior product. You're not going to have the 100% reliability that you have with silver in the circuit. So, and you know, I mean, these engineers are pretty smart. You know, I mean, I am in or wasn't in here, but the idea is that they have what they call thrifted, and this is typical across all economics. The manufacturers of a given product determine the minimum amount required to produce the most efficient product available. So in other words, a solar panel is a good example. If you go back to 2000 and look at a solar panel, and you look at 2020, the same solar voltaic uses 1/2 the amount of silver it used 20 years ago, and has the same or better than not only reliability but output. So that's called, again, thrifting or productive enhancement or whatever you want to call it. So this happens across the board, but in silver is particularly interesting because most applications use so little silver in the final product that the cost of the silver is almost insignificant to the cost of the product itself. The amount of silver in a solar panel is minuscule, must be there, but it's very low in price versus what the price of the panel itself is. And nonetheless, the manufacturers do the best they can to use as little as possible, which makes sense. I mean, I'm not against that. It's just typical good economics. In fact, if you're on a sound monetary system, your money after 10, 20, 30, 40 years would actually be more valuable because of that process. Things keep getting better and better, more efficient, and they fine-tune things, and therefore most products will become better over time. So your dollar actually buys more. I should say your money. I don't know if I should use my currency buys more.
Yeah. I think in addition to what you said earlier about the batteries, that really stands out because we're seeing a big surge in electronic vehicles right now, like scooters. People are riding these scooters all around. And obviously, there's like some new electronic car companies coming out as well. So
there is graphene. I'm sorry to interrupt. I mean, I'm going to get, or you will. I leave the comments off. I mean, I let, my paid people do whatever they wish because they pay me. But graphene is quite an interesting situation. I wouldn't say studied it. I studied parts of it. But, there could be a silver substitute. I'm going to say silver is absolutely it. So far it is. But I'm smart enough to know that my predecessor, Jerome Smith, made a big error in his forecast about silver being, $200 an ounce by the mid-90s, which would have taken place if it wasn't for a huge technological change that took place in the mining industry. So having learned that lesson well, I'm always remiss to say it's thus and so going forward, because that's a linear projection. And we know that the world does not move in a linear fashion. So I'm always a little cautious to say, well, this, that, and the other, because, there could be a substitute. Graphene it's just very expensive to put that graphite molecule by molecule or atom by atom, I think, in the nano field. But once it's accomplished, it's quite an interesting properties that exist.
Yeah. Before, I guess, we kind of started talking about a long time in the future, but in terms of like what the Federal Reserve is doing right now, I just saw today that they're going to start buying corporate bonds, like individual corporate bonds from just companies. So companies that need more money, they can just go to the Federal Reserve and basically get these, sell them the bonds. What else do you think they're going to try to do to keep this economy afloat at this point? Because it seems like they're pouring so much money into the economy, and the stock market is, for now, it's almost back where it was. But if there's a second wave of coronavirus, or if there's more social unrest or whatever, like what's the next step, honestly?
Yeah. Well, a couple comments. One is about 1 out of 5 corporations is zombified, which means that the amount of income that they produce annually doesn't pay their annual debt. So that's like you having to pay $12,000 a year just for your mortgage alone, and you only make $10,000 a year. So that's that. So what happens? So think about it. If you were in charge of the money and you knew the money always becomes worthless in these type of scenarios, wouldn't you print as much as you possibly could and then own everything that's real? Own all the real estate, own all the corporations, own all the land, own all the food suppliers, own all the politicians. Oh, they already own. I'm sorry, I misspoke. And own everything else that isn't nailed down, and then let the currency burn because you own everything that's real of productive value or has an asset, and the currency is what it is. It's worthless. So you would just print until people didn't want to take that printed money anymore. And we're going to get there, I'm pretty sure. It certainly happened in the past over and over again. The problem is, and I think several of my friends, Mike Maloney probably being the leader, has explained that with the situation we find ourselves in with the destruction of employment, supply chains, the food system, small businesses and everything else, we're going to go into a perceived deflation because cash is going to be hard to get. And most people are over leveraged, which means they borrow too much. And now they can't service the debt just like these corporations can't. So they're going to be scrambling for cash. So it's going to be very valuable to them. And that's part of the process. And then it's going to kind of do a flip flop where the people that maybe don't have enough cash still don't have enough cash. But the people that have plenty are seeing it deteriorate to the point where they've got to do something with it. And that's where the run to gold starts. So let me reframe that a little bit. I think you understand, and I think most of the viewers do as well. But you could get to a situation where I've outlined many times where you see the dollar going up and up and up, and gold going up and up and up as well. And then at some point, there'll be this divergence where you see the gold is going up, not only in dollar terms, but gold is going up and the dollar is going down. That's kind of your key, that the velocity of money has changed, where people say, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now. I don't have much savings, but I got this much. I'm not making my mortgage payment. I'm buying more canned food or whatever happens. So it's not bright. I mean, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but again, trying to be a realist. And again, people have gone through, people on the planet have gone through horrible situations throughout recorded history. I mean, my stomach gets tense just thinking about it because, I've lived in kind of one of the several decades where things have been relatively peaceful and very abundant in this country because we're able to trade pieces of paper for valuable goods all over the globe.
Yeah, well, that's why it's important to let people, find out about precious metals so that when that kind of stuff happens, as it always does throughout history, they can pretty much protect themselves and their families and stuff. So, yeah, that was a very interesting point you made, though, about how the dollar could go up, actually, even though they're printing more of it, just because they need to keep printing more and more to satisfy all the debt.
Yeah, you got to remember in the Weimar Republic, the cry from the populace was there's not enough money. They kept saying that. There's not enough money. There's not enough money. There's not enough money. What they really meant was there's not enough quality money.
Yeah.
But no one really caught on to that until the hyperinflation was so apparent. They saw, people that had life insurance policies, whole life policies, cashed them out and were able to buy a stamp to mail a letter with their life savings. I'm not saying it's going to get that bad here. In fact, I'm almost certain it won't. You don't need that type of inflation to wipe out a currency. You don't need that amount at all. In fact, a doubling in food prices, which is probably fairly likely within the next year and a half in my studied view, could be, I'm not saying would be, could be enough just to wake up enough Americans to say, oh my goodness, they'll perceive it as inflation, which part of it is, but primarily it's a supply situation. The supply of food is cut drastically, which means prices are going to go up drastically. And that's one place that the American public really does pay attention. I mean, if you got to go to a fast food place and it costs like $10 for a hamburger, it's like, wait a minute, something isn't right here.
Yeah, yeah. It's going to be a lot of alarm bells going off for a lot of Americans in the next few years, I think, in terms of the financial system. Yeah, so, hopefully, we can spread the word. And like you said, if all Americans invest in the precious metals, it would be possible to pretty much take control of the system, actually. So, there's still ways that, people can make the situation better, at least for themselves and the people around them. So that's all I got in terms of questions. Do you have anything else you would like to say?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to share a screen real quick. Let me get up a browser window here if I can. Okay, so here we are on the landing page, themorganreport.com. And all you need to do is give me a first name and an email address. You'll get our free newsletter. Interviews like this I send out to everyone. And also I do a weekly financial wrap-up called the Weekly Perspective. I usually slant it with my view on some of these commentators. And I usually use mainstream news, by the way. The other feature I'll point out is the blog here. You can come and check it 2 or 3 times a week. And I always put these type of interviews up here for easy access. I also want to point out over here on the right-hand side, buy silver and gold close to spot. This ONEX link right here takes you to a landing page that I built with my webmaster, or I designed it and he built it. And it's a way to buy precious metals under the current conditions that have very high premiums on them. Again, close to the spot price, and then you pay the premium when you cash out. So in other words, you can buy physical silver, physical gold at about a 6% premium. And then when you decide to cash out, you can pay whatever it is. Right now, it's very, very exorbitant, but I do expect the premiums to come down, and they have been coming down. So something you might want to take a look at. It's only available for US and Canadians. So if you're listening to this and you're outside of the US or Canada, sorry, this program is not available to you. So that's really all I have. I want to thank you for your time, and hopefully I helped enlighten a few people as to the benefits of owning precious metals, but you don't need to go all in. Appropriate percentage is enough for almost everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, David.